Welcome to Fortune Forecast. Thank you for joining me. We're going through the chapters of the book titled Within You is the Power by Henry Thomas Hamblin. This book is in the public domain. The previous chapter, which I'm going to do a recap on because it is really dear to me, it was titled Health. And there was a lot that resonated with me. Before I go into a personal testimonial, I'll highlight the parts that I thought resonated to me with the most. One of the things he said that too many of us live in disobedience of the natural laws. And these natural laws are encoded into this planet. Yet these laws, such as the law of cause and effect, they're in place. They are in place. And how do we choose to work with it or against it may affect us in our daily life. And I believe that the sooner that we as human beings are informed and become aware of these natural laws and we begin to work with them instead of against them, I think that our life begins to flow very magically. So going back to the health issues, one of the key things that Hamblin mentioned was that man thinks himself into ill health and disease. And I truly believe that. There are people that follow these natural laws. They do all the right things. They bathe, they eat well, they're very hygiene and all these other things. And yet they fall prey to disease and illness. And therefore, I do believe that it's that thinking yourself into disease and having these thoughts of disease, then we become prey to these illnesses and manifest it in our lives. A couple things he also mentioned about was, harboring hate and fear are parts of things that affect our well-being. And that these things need to be cast out and replaced with love. And as we replace this with love, we begin to regain health. And health is part of living in harmony. And being in harmony, then we can, have a better expression. I like also how he had that play on the word, what was it called? Reality. Like it sounded such an illusion diving into what's real, what's not real, what's reality, and what's reality. So again, very interesting chapter. Now, going to my personal experience with having a healthy mindset. 40 years ago, I was in my first marriage, which lasted 10 years. My ex-husband was 10 years my senior, and while I was a policewoman back then, and I was good at my job, I was good at communicating, I was good in the area of expression, it's interesting that I lacked that in my personal relationship. And I was not able to communicate my feelings, whether I was upset about something, I would just accept things. Well, obviously, I'm here 30 years later in a new relationship with a loving husband and a beautiful son. And I've learned from those lessons, learned to communicate what's in my heart and learning every day how to communicate in a way that's compassionate. But what had happened back then, those 40 years ago, as I was exiting that relationship, right there at the end when I had made that decision, I developed a lump, like the size of a golf ball, in my throat. My mother was the one that noticed it one day, and I was visiting her house, and she said, "Well, what's it then?" And it's like, "Oh, I really didn't notice." And she said, "Well, you need to go see a doctor." She knows that I don't do doctors well, so she said that she would accompany me, and I said, "Well, she's not going to stop if I don't see a doctor." They did several analyses, stuck deep needles in my throat, and very unhealthy what the doctor did at that time. Put fear in my mom, saying that this could be cancer, and just kind of really hammering it that this is cancerous. I did not go back to the doctor. I prayed. I realized in a very deep core that this had to do with communication, that it was me that had developed this in my physical body because it was something more deeper. I had just gone out of the divorce and living on my own and trying to heal myself. I took a few days on sick leave and then took a couple weeks off on vacation, and I used that time that I was living on my own to reflect. I was having some nightmares about communication, and that my ex-husband would come into my house and write graffiti about things that I had to do, and just to begin to realize that this is where it was coming from, that I had not mastered the ability to communicate in all my areas of my life, And I didn't go back to that doctor. What I did do was I drank a lot of water. I disconnected the phone line. I spent my mornings, sunrises at the beach. I would go for long walks. And in that very short time, God performed a miracle within me. Then in my current marriage, about, I would say maybe 13 years ago, I developed lumps in my breast, and I had several that were really big and metastasized on my left breast, and again went to the doctors because my husband and my family were like, this is not okay, and when your lumps are bigger than your breast, it's pretty bad. And of course, it seems like it was the fad thing to assume that everything was cancer. So that's what the doctors said, and having to go in for tests and things like that. And I just did not want to do that. I didn't go there. While this miracle didn't happen as quickly, my faith in God is strong. And I do believe in, modern medicine. But I also believe that we need to, as humans, do what we can to connect with divine health, and to make an effort to understand that there is maybe a part of us that wants to believe a different narrative, and to find out, is this because I'm seeking attention? Is it because there is something else that's happening in my life that I need to, make a connection with? And I'm not saying that cancer isn't real. It is. And that's why I like the play on words that Hamblin was saying. Real, reality. What's real? What's the real? What's the illusion? Where are we going to break the spell? And I connected with that divine channel and chose that. And it took 4 years, but that it's been gone for so many years. It's unbelievable. One morning I woke up and I'm like, oh my goodness, this thing is gone. Like, what? And then there was also another situation when I was working with the foreclosure program. I felt like I really was carrying the world on my shoulder, helping to train people, helping to do the marketing, helping to, talk with the banks, helping to talk with attorneys, and just, making sure that homeowners were getting all their paperwork in, and just kind of being that, Girl Friday for them, while at the same time being a professional and being an emotional counselor, letting them know that, hey, bad things happen to good people, but you need to stay the course, on this, because it was just so awful, the 2008 crash. Towards the end of that cycle, everything's a cycle, I developed this autoimmune disease that was like from below my knees to above my ankles, and it was just like these heated bumps, and they were so painful. I could not walk. And they said that 1 in 1,000 get that, and the chances of survival is those that get it, it's very minimal. I contacted a friend. Her name is Sylvia Rosario from Acupuncture Integrative Wellness Center. And I told her my situation, and she gave me these herbs and did 3 sessions of acupuncture. And after a week after that, I just miraculously recovered. But yes, the nature's way, the doctor's help was there. But I took that time also to reflect on the body part, that was being affected. It's like trying to go somewhere, trying to do something, trying to be something. And where was I going? Why was this in my legs? To me, it was relating to trying to stand, either me holding people up, standing and holding people up, or me trying to hold myself up. And I just let go. I told my husband, I said, I know that this is part of this nonprofit that you have. I just can't do it anymore. And, whatever that means for us, I'm going to put ourselves in God's hand. It wasn't easy, but let me tell you, it would be harder if you don't have health. So God took me in his loving arms, and a miracle happened through believing in him and through believing that he works wonders through doctors. So that's my testimonial about health. Yes, when we focus on good health, when we replace fear, when we replace hate, when we replace worrying, and we fill that cup with love, we begin to restore harmony. And we need to trust in God's divine plan. And this is one of the reasons why this particular chapter resonated deeply with me. Having said that, let's go ahead and jump in to the next chapter, which is chapter 7, The Secret of Abundant Supply. It is a metaphysical truth that the outward life is a reflection of the thought life. Our life is affected by our habit of thinking and attitude of mind in 2 ways. First, all our actions are unconsciously influenced by our thoughts, thus helping to bring into manifestation or attracting to us an environment that corresponds to our thoughts. Secondly, we discharge or emit an influence, silent and invisible, that no doubt affects other people. They are probably not aware of it, but they are either repelled or attracted by this silent influence. Thus, if our thoughts and mental attitude are of the wrong type, not only are our actions affected thereby, but also we exert a silent influence that assists in driving the right type of friends, opportunity, success, and every possible good away from us. The reverse also is equally true. By right thoughts and a correct mental attitude, we naturally attract to us all of the good of which our present life is capable. This may seem, at first, to be a sweeping statement, but 2 homely illustrations will prove its reasonableness. First, we will take the case of a man committed to prison for lawbreaking. His environment is obviously due to his wrong actions, the latter being the offspring of his thoughts, for all actions spring from thoughts. Next, let us take the case of a man who is the trusted head of an efficient business. Obviously, his position is the result of his actions, for he has climbed to it by hard work and faithful service, all due in the first place to constructive thinking and right attitude of mind. The Bible tells us that as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. It is equally true to say that as a man is, so does he think, and that as he thinks, so do his outer life and circumstances become. Therefore, as a man is, so is his environment. This may sound rather metaphysical, but it is really quite simple, and proof meets us at every turn. Take a man from slumdom and put him in nice surroundings, and note what happens. Very soon, he either drifts back to a slum or turns his new house into a slum dwelling. Take a man of a higher type and put him in a slum, and soon he will either leave the slum or change his slum dwelling into a more decent habitation. Put a slut in a mansion and she will turn it into a pigsty, but put a woman of a higher type in a hovel and she will make it clean enough to entertain royalty. Therefore, before you can change a person's environment, it is necessary to change inwardly the person himself. When a man becomes inwardly changed and filled with new ambitions, ideals, and hopes, he, in course of time, rises above his sordid surroundings and attracts to himself an environment that corresponds to his new state of mind. It would be useless to tidy up the house of a slut for her, for she would soon make it like a pigsty again. But if you could get a new ideal of neatness, cleanliness, order, and spotlessness into her mind, she would not rest satisfied until her immediate environment corresponded, in some measure at least, to her mental ideal or image. Very often, the failures of a man's life and its disharmonies and poverty, either comparative or real, are outward symbols of his weakness of character. He may have ability in plenty, but he may lack application or steadfastness, and thus he fails in all his undertakings and has to be kept by his wife and daughters. He will assure you that his circumstances are due to ill fortune, but the actual cause of his failures is in his character, or rather lack of character. If, therefore, a man's poverty and lack, or financial difficulties are due to weakness of character which manifests in his work and dealings with others, in the form of inefficiency, poor service, and bad judgment, it follows that he himself must change before his circumstances can be permanently altered for the better. The difficulty in dealing with unsuccessful people is in getting them to realize that they themselves are the cause of all their troubles. Until, however, they do realize this, their case is hopeless and it is impossible to help them. But when they acknowledge that the fault is theirs, they can be shown that there is a remedy for their ills and a way out of their difficulties by means of self-improvement. Let them then search for hidden weaknesses and build up those weak places in their character, such as lack of grit, determination, steadfastness, persistence, patience, probity, decision, which are the cause of their troubles. And they will find that their circumstances will gradually change for the better. Everything comes from within. First within, then out. This is the law. Therefore, the change must always take place within. See also The Fundamentals of True Success by the same author and published by the Science of Thought Press, Chichester. Going more deeply into the subject and becoming more metaphysical, it is necessary to point out that the cause of all manifestation is mind. We have already seen that a man's mind and character are reflected in his circumstances. Now let us think for a moment about the mind that is infinite. The whole universe, which is of course infinite in extent, has its origin in the divine mind and is contained within this infinite mind, just in the same way that you can hold a mental picture in your mind. God's universe, as it is imaged in the divine mind, is perfect. We see it as imperfect because we only receive a finite sense perception of that which is perfect and infinite, from this forming in our minds an image that is necessarily imperfect and finite, which we project outwards, and not knowing any better, think is real. But the universe, as imaged in the divine mind, and as it actually is in reality, is both infinite and perfect. It is also infinitely perfect. There is no poverty or lack in a universe that is infinitely perfect, whole, and complete in the divine mind. Poverty and lack have their origin in the mind of man. They have no place in the mind of God. We cannot, in a little elementary work of this kind, go more deeply into this extremely fascinating subject. Sufficient if we say here that the only reality is infinite perfection and wholeness. Therefore, there cannot be any lack at all in reality. The obvious lack and poverty that we see around us are the product of the human mind. Those who live in a consciousness of poverty and lack go through life closely fettered by limitation. They can never escape from poverty. It dogs their footsteps like their shadow. In fact, it is a shadow or reflection in the outer life of their state of mind and mental attitude. On the other hand, those who live in a consciousness of sufficiency are not troubled about supply. Their circumstances reflect their type of mind and mental attitude. It does not follow that they will be rich, for many of them prefer to live from hand to mouth, and quite large numbers of people have no desire whatever to possess wealth of any kind. But they have no worry about supply, for their needs are always met by sufficiency. Many of our readers look upon the possession of wealth as an iniquity. Personally, I do not see how, at this stage, it can be altogether avoided. Capital is necessary for the conducting of business and for the carrying out of enterprises. But as far as the hoarding of wealth is concerned, I certainly think that it is both unwise and unnecessary. There is nothing more deadening to the spiritual life than riches. There's always hope for the drunkard and the harlot, but it is more difficult, although, of course, not impossible, for one who is burdened by wealth to enter the kingdom of heaven. Some are able to do so, but they are allowed to enter simply because they hold their wealth as of no importance, merely as something of which they are stewards for a season. The hoarding of wealth is just as unnecessary as poverty. They are both based upon a fundamental error. This error is in thinking that all supply, being material, must necessarily have a material source, that it is limited in quantity and therefore must be grabbed at and fought over. The truth is, of course, that the source of supply is spiritual and therefore without limit. Consequently, one who realizes the truth has no thoughts of poverty or lack and ceases to fear it. On the other hand, he has no incentive to hoard or to grab wealth, for of what use are riches to one whose supply is forever assured? All who enter into this truth regarding supply either despise riches or hold them very lightly indeed. They cease to have any desire for wealth. Why should they have any such desire? People hanker after wealth because they fear poverty with a deadly fear, and long for wealth because they think that its possession would release them from their fears. When, however, they know the truth, they also know that their wants will always be supplied. Therefore, they no longer desire wealth and its cares and responsibilities. Wealth is just as abnormal as poverty. Our Lord showed this to be the case by choosing to be poor, but not in poverty, and by his teaching in the Sermon on the Mount. What Jesus promised was adequate supply, but not wealth or riches, to those who had sufficient faith in their heavenly Father. Many people live these planless life of utter dependence upon their spiritual source. They never become rich, but all their needs are supplied. Something always arrives in time to meet their requirements. Such a life requires a very live and active faith, but its results are as certain as the rising of the sun. An understanding of the truth regarding supply is a necessary foundation for the faith without which the planless life is impossible. It is necessary to know the utter falseness and unreality of poverty and lack before we can trust in divine providence or the working of spiritual, at the same time, mental law. It is necessary to know that the universe is spiritual, that God is spirit, in whom we live and move and have our being, and that because we are a part, very small, but yet a part of the whole, all our wants, all through the ages, must be supplied. Supply, sufficient for all our needs, is the reality. Poverty and lack, the product of lack of faith, of fear, of ignorance, of weakness of character, have their origin in the human mind and are the unreality, the negative which has no permanence or reality. When we have learned the truth, it is necessary to live in the consciousness of it, and to think and act and praise God as though sufficiency were already ours. Not to spend money that we cannot afford to spend, nor to incur debt, but to live mentally in an atmosphere of abundant supply. We have to remember that the change in consciousness must take place first and become well established before its effects can be seen to manifest in the outer life. The entering of this higher consciousness where we know and realize the truth, viz., that the source of all our supply is spirit and that the divine source is limitless, is not easy, although it is less difficult to some than to others. It demands constant mental activity and watchfulness. It requires persistence and perseverance in right thinking. Yet, it is possible to those who are in earnest. By living in the consciousness of God's supply and exercising a lively faith, the life becomes affected principally due to both conscious and unconscious change of action. Having dealt with the esoteric of inner side of the subject of supply, I will now treat it more from the outer or practical side, the latter being, of course, just as important as the former. The teaching of this chapter does not discourage industry and thrift. Far from it. After the Lord Christ had fed the 5,000, all the leavings were carefully collected so that nothing should be wasted. This is in accord with universal law. There is a law of economy, both in the natural and spiritual worlds. Nature appears on the surface to be very wasteful and prodigal, but actually, she never wastes anything if it can be avoided. Therefore, the action of the disciples was in accord with universal law. What a lesson for us! To be careful and saving is a mark of superiority, both in mind and character. The wastefulness of the helpless poor is notorious. Those who are well-to-do are far more careful and conserving than the very poor. There are exceptions, it is true, but the rule is that a man who cannot save money has not it in him to command success in life. Inability to deny himself certain things shows a weakness of character and lack of purpose which makes success impossible. Two men that I knew very well built fortunes upon P5, which they saved out of meager earnings. It is always the start that it is difficult. If you cannot overcome the preliminary difficulties, you have not the steadfast purpose to hold your own in the battle of life. On the other hand, once the initial difficulties have been overcome, it is not difficult to get your bark into the currents of prosperity. When once you realize that there is unlimited abundance in which you can share, when once you learn to live in the consciousness of this abundance, at the same time living within your present income and doing your present work as well as it is possible for it to be done, you have set out on the path to affluence. One who realizes and really believes that there is abundance and plenty for him puts into operation a powerful law which will surely bring opportunity to him sooner or later. Many, however, ruin their hopes by not knowing that for a time they must live a kind of double life. They must be opulent in consciousness, but careful and thrifty in actual practice. The time will come when their means will largely increase. Then, if they are wise, they will live on part of their income instead of living up to it. This will give them a wide margin for charitable purposes, for the taking up of further opportunities, and for extensions. Many businessmen have to let golden opportunities pass simply because they have saved little or nothing, owing to lavish private expenditure. Or they have to let other people in to share their schemes who, in addition to taking a large share of the profits, may prove a serious handicap and hindrance in other ways. While in its essence the source of supply is spiritual, it comes to us through material channels, and in order to have a share in it, it is necessary to earn it. We have to give something in exchange for what we draw from life in the way of supply. We must give in order to receive, and what we give must be something that the world wants or needs. The secret of supply is, then, to realize that there is unlimited abundance and to live in the consciousness of it as completely as though no material channels existed, and at the same time to work as zealously and be as careful as though there were no such thing as spiritual supply. At the same time, we must give the world something that it wants, or otherwise serve in some useful capacity, exercising honesty, probity, and justice in all our affairs. It is folly to expect abundance to drop ready-made in our lap. It must be earned by intelligent and faithful service. This subject is treated fully in The Fundamentals of True Success by the same author, published by the Science of Thought Press, Chichester. Being a retired businessman who started life with nothing, not even good health, I have looked at this subject from a businessman's point of view. The principle applies, however, to every walk in life, and each reader can adapt the teaching of this lesson to his or her particular needs. And this concludes Chapter 7. Come follow. I'll meet you at the next video.